Welcome back to Wild Rose Moon's Moonlight series, an intimate look at the great local talent that surrounds us all. Tonight we have a special guest, John Kennedy. Our host is John Baylor, and a special thanks to Gibson Insurance and the Gibson Foundation, the Marshall County Community Foundation, and the Marshall County Tourism. Here's your host, John Baylor.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us on Moonlight. Now, our guest is a man by the name of John Kennedy, and I'm going to say just a few words before we get started. South Bend, the South Bend area is an area that's good at celebrating its Irish heritage. And there are a lot of ways we do this, but with any kind of celebration of Irish heritage, music is a very, very important part of it. And there are plenty of people playing this kind of music around South Bend. I don't think I can quite say that John Kennedy is the reason, because I think this is a tradition that's been around before you and one that will continue after you. But he's been an absolutely integral part of the Irish music tradition in South Bend in this area. And not only as a performer, but also as a kind of a mentor to other musicians. And so we appreciate what you've done, not only for Irish music, but for music and culture and community all the way around. So thank you, John Kennedy, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And I want to dig into that tradition just a little bit before we get started as well, and ask you, where does a man with a name like John Kennedy get an interest in Irish music?
I grew up with it. I grew up inside of a very Irish home. My mother's parents came over in 1927 from Donegal. So they grew up in the Irish immigrant ghettos of Newark, New Jersey. And my father's a couple of generations removed, but still grew up inside of a very intensely ethnic world. My father said, for example, Friday nights would be the Irish dances, but Thursday nights would be the Polish dances. Wednesday night would be the German dances. And on Tuesdays, they'd go to the Italian neighborhoods and have fights. It was just a very ethnic world. And my father in particular and his twin brother, they sang. And my grandmother, for example, this would be my mother's mother, said that you could hear them coming down the street. If they were coming to pick up my mother, they were always singing. That's what you did. So for me, music was just singing in the kitchen with family, or in particular in the car. I think we probably did most of our singing on long drives. That's how it got started.
I'm also a musician that comes from a strong family background of singing, and just really owe everything that I'm doing to my father in particular, for all the music that he brought into his life. I had somebody ask me a question. I'm going to just ask you a variation of the same thing, but somebody asked me earlier today, what are my favorite artists, and I feel like I'm kind of at a loss to hear that question, because my dad doesn't. I mean, there's a way that's a wonderful answer to that question, and there's a way that's like, I know that's not what you're looking for. How much, you've mentioned a little bit of your influence from your family. How much would you say that you draw from professional artists or popular music?
Just yesterday, a fellow in Chicago, great man in traditional music, Kevin Henry, passed away, 91, I believe. And I did not grow up playing, the whistles and flutes, and that whole instrumental side of the tradition was in my family. And I would not have known if my grandmother had not lived to be 102 years old, and if I had not made a habit, starting when she was about 75, of going out and spending time with her and listening to her tell stories about growing up with it. And the family's very musical. Turns out that of the probably more than 100 cousins I have in Scotland, because my grandmother's father's brothers, all 8 of them, went to Scotland. Musicians everywhere in the family. I was never a particular fan of popular music growing up. I didn't buy a bunch of records. I didn't go to rock concerts. Irish music, when I picked up a guitar, that's what I started singing. And then folk music, kind of started broadening out. I first picked up a guitar to start singing in the Peace Corps. And what happened there is in Chile at that time, and I hope it's still the same, you went to a house party, a guitar would come out at some point, and it would go around the room, and everybody would have a song. You might only have one song, but absolutely everybody would have a song. And I was like, I feel at home here in ways that I never felt at home in South Bend. And so I picked up the guitar, and I started learning Chilean songs, and then I sent a letter to my family. That's all you could do back then. They sent me a cassette tape of a bunch of Irish songs that I grew up with, and then I started putting the Irish stuff together. And I got back to South Bend, and it was interesting. Like, I missed the aspect of Chilean culture that had made me feel at home in Chile, because it made me feel like what I was accustomed to at home here. And what music allowed me to do was to start creating around myself this little world of culture where I felt comfortable. Because growing up in South Bend inside of a very Donegal Irish home, I would go out of the house and I would feel out of place in my own hometown. And what Irish music has done is it's allowed me to kind of create a bubble around myself where people who like some of the things that I like, Irish music, and a certain way of looking at the world too, are attracted to it. So in that sense, Irish music has provided a way for me to connect with the world. And it was, circle back to Kevin Henry. It was his flute playing. He's from Sligo, and he plays a very particular style. It was the very first Irish traditional music that made my blood boil. Up until then, I just heard a bunch of notes, right? It all sounds the same.
Yeah.
And to many people, I'm sure Irish music still does. It all sounds the same. Jigs and reels, hornpipes, what's the difference? I heard Old Man Henry, and my blood boiled. And that's what got me on the traditional musical road, was this great old man from Sligo. And he just passed away yesterday. In the world of traditional Irish music in Chicago, this is the passing of a king. The world of traditional Irish music in Chicago just fundamentally changed.
It's well, sorry to hear about his passing, but it sounds like lived a good life anyways. Got a lot of years under his belt. But I wanted to also circle back around. It's interesting that your love of Irish traditional music started off by playing Chilean. Maybe that's traditional music. Maybe I'm making an assumption there.
It's very much the same. Yeah, very much the same. Poetry. It's being in love with words. See, I might not have made this clear earlier. There were no instruments growing up. You just sang. You just sang.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I picked up the guitar in Chile because in Chile, everybody played the guitar.
Yeah.
But there's a real intense love of poetry. And Chile, this tiny little country, has had two Nobel Prize-winning poets, Gabriela Mistral and Pablo Neruda. Two Nobel Prize-winning poets, very much like Ireland in that sense.
Yeah, right.
Where was my grandmother, again, she was about 95 when I asked her what she had to play with growing up in Ireland. 13 people, 2-room cottage. Wow. And she said all we had to play with were words. So that's what the Irish do.
Yeah, right. I get the feeling we could go on, but I'm interested in hearing a little bit of music. We've been talking about some of this Irish tradition and Irish music, and you said you were going to play a couple of songs for us that are the ones that you don't get to play when you're playing with an Irish band. So we'll move away from that tradition just a little bit. I don't know how far away from it we can ever get when you're playing a song for us.
These songs would be very welcome in a traditional Irish setting in Ireland.
Yeah.
The Irish don't make the distinction about categories of music. A good friend, Owen O'Neill, he was over here many years ago, and he said it's very strange for him to come to America, where in America you had to be a traditional Irish musician. Where he says in Ireland, you're just a musician. You know, it's just another song.
Yeah.
Back in Ireland, my grandmother born in 1904. They sang anything. My Old Kentucky Home was a favorite back in Ireland when she's 8, 9, 10 years old. You know. So they any song that you can sing. All right, this is an Indiana song of all things, at least in my mind when I was writing it.
Oh, Jacob, fine and gentle man, he was 85 years old, finally bought his land. Raised 15 children, 9 of them were sons, hands of rusty iron, $400 and a gun. Old Jacob built himself a home. First in all his 85 years he could call his own. Sons and his daughters, though still left alive, side by side with Jacob, trying to survive. Oh, Jacob worked that land so hard, into the fields at dawn, worked till darkness gone. Evening, sitting by the fire, hungry, hard and hurting, singing, they sounded like a choir. Old Jacob, on his way to town, buy supplies and pay some bills on loans that he had drawn. Spied 4 men on horseback with white sheets on their heads. Old Jacob, he knew that he was dead. Jacob knew those men by name. Charlie owned the bank in town, Fred he drove the train, John a fellow farmer, Joe his only son. Oh, Jacob, he reached down for his gun. Oh, Jacob raised his hand and said, Charlie, Joe, and Fred and John, you've white sheets on your heads. Stand aside or kill me, I have no regrets. On my way to town today, to pay my honest debts. Oh, Jacob, a religious man, prayed to God he not use the gun held in his hand. Heard voices shouting, he turned toward the sun. Down that hill in raging glory came old Jacob's son.
good, fine and gentle man. He was 85 years old when he finally bought his land. Raised 15 children, none of them were sons. Hands of rusty iron, $400 and a gun.
Beautiful.
Whew.
Thanks for sharing. You said that's an Indiana song, and it doesn't exactly have to be. There's a few different places you could put that one, but
Yes, it could be anywhere, really. It could be anywhere.
the largest Klan rally, Ku Klux Klan rally, was in Kokomo, Indiana, and that's sort of the area where I'm from. And the last lynching was in Marion, which is just down the road from Kokomo.
I did not know that.
So it's a bigger part of Indiana history than what a lot of us realize.
National headquarters was in Anderson, Indiana,
Mm-hmm.
for a good while. Yeah. I didn't know the last lynching was in Marion.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, they didn't lynch Jacob.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't get him. He's just a fictional character, of course.
Yeah.
And in reality, he would have ended up in southern Michigan. Right? You go up to southern Michigan and you ride your bicycle around and you see African-American farmers. Because escaped slaves, if they got to Michigan, right, they were free, whereas Indiana repatriated.
Mm-hmm.
So all you have to do is cross the border and get out there in the country. And what's the name of the town east of Niles? That's Underground Railroad destination. Can't think of it.
I'm not sure. As I mentioned, I'm from a little farther south of here.
Okay.
We had, well, actually, the road that my high school was on, the name of the road is Colored Pike, which it was named because of a lot of black farmers in the area, which is really unusual. But it was an Underground Railroad spot.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, where's this again?
That's in Howard County, which, I mean, it's history, racial history, as I say, is not all good news. But there's a northwest part of the county. There was a Quaker community, and
That would explain it.
yeah.
That would explain that.
Mm-hmm.
Cass County, Michigan has the same history,
Yeah.
where Quakers on the East Coast, when they freed their slaves, didn't just say goodbye. They freed them and went with them in order to help them establish themselves. And the community in Cass County first tried Ohio, and it didn't work, and then resettled in Cass County. So you had a mixed race community there, going back a long time. And so 150 years ago, you had white children going to school and having black teachers.
Yeah.
You have you have these little stories, these little isolated stories, but they're not part of the larger narrative.
Right.
I had a friend, she was a professor at Notre Dame, and I will not be able to pull her name up. And she grew up in a community like that in Ohio. And she said that she didn't know she was black until she got to college.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, she got confronted with, wow. I mean, I grew up in a community where I didn't have to make that decision. I got to be me.
Right. Yeah. Now, when I talk to you, you're always beating yourself up over your picking and your musicianship, and you emphasize when we talked before that your family music was all singing, and you guys weren't your parents. There was no accompaniment; they were just singing all the time.
That's right.
And so you came to the guitar a little bit later, and like I say, you're just always picking on yourself and saying how much further you have to go on the instrument, but you still manage to keep some interest on that thing, I would say.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I mean, you're mostly playing the root of the chord on that, but you have this nice bass line through the song. I mean, that you just played, and then your nice little fluttery notes that you get with the finger picking.
I like the way you put that.
Yeah. Well, for me, when I was listening to what the guitar was doing, then that's sort of the way I hear it. Like there's a bass, and then there's other stuff which is nice, kind of pretty over the top, but that's not what you're listening to, you know.
Okay.
What and I'd like to get into just a little bit of the craft of putting something like that together. When you write a song, where does the guitar come into play, and what do you want to accomplish with it?
I usually begin with a riff. Well, I'll be just sitting with the guitar and something happens. There's a musical idea. You hear where a chord might want to go, and then the riff opens up, and it's kind of like you're knocking on a door. And if the door opens up, there's a story inside. And I don't feel like I write songs so much as archaeologically uncover them. I mean, that's really what it feels like. Songs for me tend to happen.
I think of it as rather than digging for something just falling on me from above. But
Yeah.
the same basic idea.
Well, it's like, the statue is there inside of the stone.
Mm-hmm.
Musical sculptor.
It's already there.
Yeah.
And like when you find a line that has resonance, there's a ring to it. Now, often what will happen is there'll be a verse or a chorus. And it's just got strength, and you just want to keep singing it, and then you don't know where it's supposed to go. And then you get out pen and pencil, and you just start just writing down anything and everything that comes to your mind. Often a song doesn't go in the direction that I meant it to go in. Yeah. So the song has its own shape and its own life. That's my experience with it. One song, for example, we're not going to do this right now, but it'd be to circle back to Irish music and my grandparents. My grandfather lived with us for a while. He spent 18 months at a British concentration camp, suffered massively from depression. And as a child, I slept on the couch, and he had my room for a while, like I think it was 18 months. And he kept falling asleep and with cigarettes, and he was going to burn the house down. So it's like, okay, Grandpa can't stay with us anymore. But for years after he moved out, probably a good 10 years, till I was that's longer than that. I wrote a song for him when I was about 28 years old. 2 or 3 times a year, he would come to my mind, and I would sob. I mean, just absolutely sob. And then the song about him came, and I haven't sobbed like that for him since. It's like that song was just there, and it wanted to be found. And when I found it, I get to revisit that moment and revisit him with that song. So like I say, I don't so much feel like I write them, although when you're crafting a lyric, there is this wonderful feeling when a verse is done. It's like you hear a click in your head. Every single word is just right there. That's a great feeling.
I wish I had the time to jump in and follow that story because I think that's just an excellent story, and like the healing and the music come in the same moment.
For me, yeah.
But we're going to run out of time before we get to a second song, so I think I want to hand it back over to the voice and the instrument.
Okay, and we're gonna to some extent, kind of stay with the same general theme that we started with. We're going to do an Underground Railroad song. And co-wrote this with Kevin Joyner. This is one of those songs where I had the chorus and the hook, and I wanted the song to go in one direction. And in order to get a song out of it, I had to let go, and I had to let a fellow songwriter take the song in a direction that I'm like, no, but I kept my mouth shut, let Kevin do what he could do, and then we kind of came back and started partnering on it. So this is Harriet Tubman. Tubman was born Araminta Ross around 1820 in Maryland's Dorchester County. Her parents were of the Ashanti tribe working as slaves in the Brodus Plantation. 1849, she married a free man named John Tubman. 1849, fearing that she would be sold, Tubman escaped with the help of a woman who connected her to the Underground Railroad. Given the names of two people and directions to a house where she was put into a wagon and covered with a sack, she made her way to Philadelphia. The following year, she returned to Maryland and escorted her sister and her sister's two children to freedom. She then returned for her brother and two other men. On a third trip, she rescued her 70-year-old parents. Harriet Tubman was a deeply spiritual person who expressed an open faith in God. She returned south 19 times, freeing over 300 people. They called her Moses. During our Civil War, she was a nurse, scout, and spy for the Union armies. During one campaign, she freed over 750 people. Denied pay for her service, she returned north in a baggage car. John Brown said that she was one of the bravest persons on this continent. Thomas Garrett wrote, "It is obvious that her success is attributable to her utter disregard of the consequences." Frederick Douglass said that accepting John Brown as sacred memory, I know of no one who has willingly encountered such hardships and perils in the service of our enslaved people than Harriet Tubman. Running through the rain, black dogs are howling somewhere behind me to return me to my chains. And then I see her across a clearing, her face shining in the night. Harriet Tubman, freedom's angel, crying, let my people go. My lungs are burning, my hands are praying, my heart is aching I had to leave them on the plantation with the vow that I'd set them free. And in this nightmare I see a vision. I am guided by her light. Harriet Tubman, freedom's angel, crying, let my people go. A year has passed now since I found freedom. I've returned to keep my vow. Once more I'm running through dark and danger, but my legs are steady now. I will remember she led me when I free my family tonight. Harriet Tubman, freedom's angel, crying, let my people go. Whew.
Wow.
Well, thank you very much, John, for joining us.
Amazing.
And thank you for sharing. It's been a great one. This is just our first episode out of 2, so make sure you catch the next installment
Oh,
of
thanks.
Moonlight, because
Yeah.
I think we'll have another good one.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. And everybody here at the Moon, and to Frank. Private joke, folks.
Maybe it seems like a deep, dark night, but follow me outside into the moonlight.
Thanks everybody for watching Wild Rose Moon's Moonlight series. We got to thank Gibson Insurance, the Gibson Foundation, Marshall County Community Foundation, the Marshall County Tourism. If you'd like to help the Moon, you can become a member of the Wild Rose Moon and contribute that way. Special thanks to John Kennedy for being a great guest tonight, John Baylor for being a great host, Howard Gibbs, Katie Smith, Jim Yoakum, and George Schricker for some behind-the-scenes help. I'm Ryan Meir. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.